Confucius consulting the Yijing? Good grace. I wasn't really sure if I should add this example to the series of early Yijing usage videos, because I personally don't think that it really happened. It's a case about Confucius consulting the Yijing. And I know there are several examples of Confucius consulting the Book of Changes, but personally I don't think that he had anything to do with Yijing or was interested in it. Maybe he did know about the book, but I don't think he ever consulted it. And I know that a lot of books will tell you otherwise. But you know, Confucius said that you had to respect the spirits, but you had to keep them at a distance. And at his time, oracles were associated with the ancestors and spirits. So if you consulted an oracle, you were actually consulting ancestors or spirits. So from that perspective, I don't think that Confucius would ever consult Yijing. Also, because he this whole idea of the Yijing and oracles and this concept of change doesn't really fit his ideas about the universe and society. So for me, it doesn't really match Confucius using the Zhaoyi. I don't think that he ever did that. So, but that's actually an entirely different topic that I don't want to talk about in this video. This is a case which is found in several classical books, and it's a case about Confucius receiving Hexagram 22. And there are some interesting things in this case. So even though it might not actually have happened, I do think the case shows how at the time this anecdote was written, this story, I think it shows how they looked at Hexagram 22 and how they saw the Chinese text and the name of Hexagram 22 and with which kind of meaning they saw in it. And I think that's always interesting. So let's go to my little presentation that I prepared for this and see what comes up when we look at the original Chinese text of these examples. And this story is found in several classical books, and it is found in the Shoyuan, translated as the Garden of Eloquence, written by Liu Xiang, translated by Eric Henry, and I believe this is a text from around 100 BC, I think. I'm not really sure. I didn't really look up the date. Okay, I confess. But in a note to this translation, Eric Henry says that this anecdote has parallels in several other books. It's in the Lu Shi Chunqiu, and actually there's an I missing there, which you can see there. But anyway, almost every book has typos. So it's found in the Lu Shi Chunqiu, and it's found in the Kongzi Jiayu. There, the Kongzi Jiayu. So this story is found in 3 different books. And I believe that the version in the Lu Shi Chunqiu is the oldest version. It's also the shortest version. And the versions from the Kongzi Jiayu and from the Shouyuan are later versions. And the interesting thing is, and it is something that you will see very often, that the further you go back in time, the longer the story gets, and there's more added to it. So in the first version from the Lu Shi Chunqiu, Confucius doesn't say really much about Hexagram 22 and how he sees it, but in the other versions, a lot of more sentences and imagery is added to it. So let's first look at the version in the Lu Shi Chunqiu, the Annals of Lu Buwei, which is beautifully translated and annotated by John Knobloch and Jeffrey Regal. And so this is their translation. And their translation says, when he divined and obtained the hexagram variegated, Confucius said, inauspicious. His disciple Zhegong said, this hexagram variegated is also good. Why do you say that it is inauspicious? And Confucius replied, the white should be pure white and the black pure black. How could variegated ever be good? Therefore, what the worthy hate above all else are things that lack a definite position. So what you see here in this Chinese text is that the name of hexagram 22b there in ancient Chinese texts, hexagrams are always referred to by their name, never ever by numbers. To give hexagram numbers is really a Western approach. It's a more or less Western invention. In ancient texts, always the names are used. And in this case, in which Confucius consults Yijing and gets hexagram 22b, this name is linked to colors. And in this translation, the name of hexagram 22 is translated as variegated. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right, but you know what I mean. Which actually refers to something that has multiple colors. Something that is spotted. It has well, kind of patches with different colors. And Confucius doesn't really like that, because he says that white should be white and pure black should be pure black. So how could this be good? And the commentator adds to that what the worthy hate above all else are things that lack a definite position. So this last sentence might explain why Confucius felt a little bit uncomfortable with this outcome, because he saw hexagram 22 as something that doesn't have a definite color. Because with hexagram 22, you can make of it what you want. You can give it any color that you like. Whereas black is just black and white is white, and that's just what it is. But with variegated, it can be anything, so it isn't really definite. And Confucius is known for saying that things and people in society should have a definite position. And so that's where his whole idea of, I think what it's called, Zhengming, rectification of names, and also this idea that the husband should be a husband, king should be a king, etc., son should be a son. And if everything has its proper name, then, everybody knows what he has to do, everybody knows what he can expect from other people, and then the whole country will be in order and at peace. But with hexagram 22, the things aren't as definite as he would like them to be. It talks about That's what character actually means. It's what we will also see in the other examples, is that there are multiple colors attached to it, and even these multiple colors aren't definite. It can be anything. It can be a mix of orange and blue. It can be yellow and green, whatever. So and that is a hexagram that doesn't really fit the ideas of Confucius. So this is the shortest version of this anecdote. Wait, I see this button here on my stream deck. What does that do? Oh, haha. Sorry about that. Next case. This is the version from the Comparative, which is a later text, and I couldn't find a translation of it, so I translated it myself. And as you will see, several lines are added to it. The general idea is still the same, but more is added to it. Confucius once consulted the Yarostocks and got hexagram B, hexagram 22. He looked dissatisfied. Zhejiang stepped forward and said, Master, I heard that when a diviner gets hexagram B, it is auspicious. Why does the master look unhappy? And Confucius replied, Because of trigram Li, fire. In the Zhao there is fire under the mountain. This is called B. It is not a hexagram of pure or correct color. For the color of one's nature, black and white is proper and correct. Now, I received B. It is not my omen, or you could also say, this omen does not fit me. I have heard that cinnabar is not painted and white jade is not carved. Why? Because their nature is sufficient and does not accept decoration. So, as you can see, the general idea is still the same, but a few more lines are added to it. And what I find interesting here is that Confucius is really upset by the trigram fire in hexagram 22, because the lower trigram is the trigram is the trigram fire, and the way fire is being described in the commentaries with hexagram 22, it's a trigram fire that is more or less hidden in the hexagram, but it also shines on the mountain that is on top of it. But it's the lower trigram, which more or less means that it isn't really visible. Well, I can only assume why Confucius wasn't really happy with trigram fire. He doesn't really say why that is the case. He says that he's unhappy because of trigram fire, but maybe it's because fire has to do with being seen and to radiate, and it has to do with light and being attached to something, having relationships, having networks. But as a lower trigram, and it's also inside the mountain or below the mountain, it means that you're not really seen. So maybe that's also part of the reason why Confucius felt unhappy with this hexagram, because a low trigram fire might mean that his ideas aren't really seen or accepted. Now, I'm also saying this because I know that was actually the case, that in several states his ideas were ignored or rejected. So I'm using the information here that I know about Confucius. But maybe that's one of the reasons why he didn't like this hexagram. And the extra lines that are added here, that are not found in the Lu Shi Chunqiu, are these lines that he has heard that cinnabar is not painted and white jade is not carved. Why? Because their nature is sufficient and does not accept decoration. So you could also say that it does not really need to be decorated, because these things are pure by themselves. So maybe Confucius here is comparing himself to cinnabar that is already perfect by its own nature, and the same goes for white jade. It is white and it's good as it is. Jade, to my knowledge, was never painted in China, I think. Can't recall any examples in which jade was painted. But anyway, so here he gets Hexagram 22, and he links it to things that are pure by their own nature. So maybe he thinks that his own nature isn't as pure as white jade, or isn't as pure as cinnabar, and that is how he reads Hexagram 22. So, because that is what actually the name of Hexagram 22 means. I looked it up in the Hanyu Zhejian dictionary, and there is at this moment a website which contains the Hanyu Zhejian dictionary. I'm not sure if this that website will still be available in the short term, because the Hanyu Zhejian is still copyrighted. But anyway, this is what the Hanyu Zhejian says when it comes to the meaning of the name of Hexagram 22. It means decorative, ornamental. So you are spicing things up with decorations. Another meaning is that of magnificent and radiant appearance, but it refers to the Zhao Yi for that meaning, and also it is what Kong Da says from the Tang Dynasty. So I'm always a little bit wary when a definition from a dictionary uses the Yijing as an example, because that for me that's not really helpful. I would like to see other texts that use that specific meaning. So, and the third meaning is it's one of the 64 hexagrams, duh. And here, this one is interesting for our example here, because it means its multicolored appearance. And it actually refers to this example from Confucius consulting the Yijing and receiving hexagram 22. And other commentators say that it means that color is not pure, that hexagram 22 means that the name of hexagram 22 means that the color is not pure. So, and that it's actually a lone character for this character, which actually means this idea of something that is spotted, that has several colors. So, and that is how the name Hexagram 22 is seen in this example. So, the example from the Garden of Eloquence, the Shoyuan, is even a little bit more elaborate. Well, let's just read it. Once Kongzi, which is Confucius, was casting with the Yi and obtained hexagram B, upon which he looked up and heaved a sigh in a manner that showed dissatisfaction. Stepping forward, Zhejiang raised his hands in respectful salutation and said, "I have heard that B is an auspicious hexagram. Why do you sigh?" "B is not a pure color. That is why I sigh," replied Kongzi. "I am drawn to that which retains its essential unaltered hue. White should be pure white and black pure black. What good resides in the hexagram B? I have also heard that no designs are added to cinnabar and whatever. That white jade is never carved, and that precious pearls are never painted. Why is this the case? It is because the essential stuff of these objects is so manifest as to reject all decoration." And this is the translation by Eric Henry, and what he translates here as the essential stuff of the objects is so manifest, that's actually his translation of this character, which you also find in this example from the Confucius Zhejian. So excuse me, the Kong Zi Jia Yu, and that we find it here. And I translate it as nature, one's character or nature is sufficient. And personally, I'm not really happy with the translation of essential stuff of these objects that is manifest. I prefer character or nature. But anyway, I think the general idea is still the same. So, and here you can see that white jade is mentioned, but precious pearls are added to it. So, and as a note, Eric Henry adds that the basic meaning of this hexagram, according to the Shiguatuan, which is the sequence of the hexagrams chapter from the 10 wings, and that explicitly says that it has to do with decoration. And as a note, he adds that not apart from the Garden of Eloquence, item 10.3 in his translation, also begins with Comte heaving a great sigh upon coming across particular hexagrams in the changes. And I looked that up in his translation, and in that part, Confucius is reading the Zhao Yi, and he is reading about hexagram 41 and hexagram 42. So he's not consulting the Yijing there, which is more or less a different context. So, but here with hexagram 22, he's actually consulting the Yijing, which I don't think he ever did. But anyway, so here you see that the essential stuff of these objects is so manifest as to reject all decoration. It's still about being pure and being without decoration, whereas hexagram 22 is all about decoration and adding stuff to something that probably is not really necessary. It's about the packaging and by looking looking nice and charming. Well, of course, I also looked up the Chinese text of hexagram 22 and also two examples, two translations, and just to show you how this text is translated by a few translators in very different way. This is the translation from Stephen Field, the Duke of Dao Changes, and just to show you how Stephen adds or sees layers in each line of text, because here we have the text of line 1, 2, 3, etc., and he sees there are several layers in it, and I think he's done a beautiful job with showing these layers in this way by using these columns. So that doesn't mean I entirely agree with his translation, but I do like how he presents it. And here he says about the name of hexagram 22, he says that the oldest form of the graph, the name of hexagram 22b, was the picture of a flowering plant and meant brilliant or ornate. Later versions added the element for cowrie shell, an early form of money. That's actually this part here. With the extended meaning to adorn as a verb or an ornament as a noun. In each line text below, the incidence of B is translated according to a somewhat different context, depending on where the adornment occurs. In all cases, the decorations accompanying a wedding are described. And he is quoting Li Jing in his Tanyuan, which I don't know. He's also referring to Richard Kunst's handwritten notes that Richard Kunst kept when he was working on his dissertation on the Yijing. However, the customs depicted are not what we normally would expect in a traditional Chinese wedding, where red is the dominant color. Gao Heng believes line 1 describes the non-Chinese custom of tattooing. Well, we have seen Gao Heng before in another video. And here, Stephen is completely ruining Richard Kunst's name and making it almost German. But anyway, as I said earlier, there are no books without typos. So his translation is interesting. Because in each line he seems to translate the name of Hexagram 22, which occurs in every line. As you can see here and there, the name is in every line of this hexagram, which is actually quite exceptional, because a lot of hexagrams don't carry the name the name of the hexagram. But he translates it differently for each line. He says at the first line, the feet are bejeweled, and hexagram 2, his beard festooned. Okay, I have a confession to make. I haven't got a clue what that means. Okay, next. Elegant and sleek. So that's his translation of, let me get rid of that, of these 4 characters, elegant and sleek. Which isn't wrong, I think, but if now the name of hexagram 22 suddenly becomes elegant, and with hexagram with the 4th line, he translates it in rhyme, which at first I found puzzling why he did that, but I think I found the explanation for that. He says, fancy and fair, white horse and mare. So he translates here's the white horse, and I think that this must be the mare. And I like the rhyme in it, but at first I wasn't really sure why he put it in rhyme. But later on I thought, you have here bi ru po, that's the normal pronunciation of that character, ru, bai ma, han ru. But later I found out that actually this right part is pronounced as fan. So I think that Stephen also reads this character as fan, not as po, but as a different pronunciation, fan. And then you get this rhyming sentence, biru, fanru, bai ma, hanru. So you have fan, ru, hanru. So, and I think that's the reason why Stephen added rhyme to it. I always like it when a translator does that, because it gives you a better idea of how the original Chinese text looks and how it might be read in the ancient times. Then he says, with the 5th line, bedecked up the hill, scanty bolts of silk, and there will be regret, but good fortune in the end. Fine. Trimmed in white. Now, so suddenly B is trimmed, because this is the character white, can't really mean anything else. So that's white. So now it's suddenly trimmed. And you can't really say that his translation is wrong. But personally, I would really think hard before I would translate one Chinese character, in 6 different ways. I would personally always try to translate it in the same way, if that is possible. That's not always possible. If you look at hexagram 10, the name of hexagram 10, Lu, it can actually, I think, should be translated in different ways because of the way it is being used in the line text. So in one line text, it's definitely a verb, whereas in the other line text, it's definitely a noun. So, but in this case, especially when you look at how the character is being used, it's, for most lines, it's still the same pattern. You have bi qi, and here with 2nd line also bi qi, and then you have bi ru, be Ru, and only here is the difference, and here. So I don't think that translating that character in 6 different ways is really necessary. But anyway, another translation which I really like is the translation from Dennis Schilling, and it's a pity that it will never be translated to English because it is such a beautiful book and such a well annotated translation of the Zhao Yi. But it's in German, but I translated the text there in English. And as you can see here, um, Schilling translates it constantly as Verzierung, which means decoration. Here in the title he makes it a noun, but here in the lined text he makes it a verb. One decorates their toes, one decorates their beard, and the translation of the third line I actually found it quite funny, not because of the first part, how colorful, how shiny in the English translation, but the sentence that comes after it. Uh, in German it reads, die Verkündung von dauerhaftem Bestehen an die Ahnen verheißt Glück. Or in English, the proclamation of permanent existence to the ancestors promises happiness. That's his translation of only 3 characters. And to translate a sentence like that, I'm not laughing to make fun of him. I mean, but I always find it funny when a short sentence is translated with so many words. And it's not a wrong translation, but actually the translation from Stephen Field comes closer to the original. He says, omen of good fortune in the long term. And that is actually how this phrase was used. We find this phrase or similar phrases with Yong Zhen Yi, something like that, in, for instance, the Baoshan divination journals, where it's constantly being said, well, on the long term, this divination is auspicious. So I think that Stephen Field is correct here, whereas Dennis Schilling, with his The Proclamation of Permanent Existence to the Ancestors Promises Happiness, I think that's a little bit too much for 3 characters. So, but anyway, that's just my opinion. Then he says, and that's also something that I found quite surprising. He says in translation, sometimes decorated, sometimes blank. And that is a little bit weird to me, because if you look at the Chinese original text, you can see the same kind of pattern, because the character Ru here, there, and there. The pattern in these 2 sentences, at least the first part, is the same, and yet he translates these sentences different. He says here with the third line, how colorful, how shiny. And then with the fourth line, he says sometimes decorated, sometimes blank. And I wonder why he did that. Because he could also have translated the fourth line as how decorated or how blank, or something like that. And that is something that I often wonder about. How do translators make these choices, and why do they deviate from another sentence that has the same pattern? Because I personally don't think that's really necessary. This character Ru is often translated as the I don't know what it's called, but this last part of the seeing or doing, ing, the ing part of a verb or it has this idea of appearance. It looks like something. It shows itself like something else. So it's an image. So that's what this character rule often means when it is behind another character. So rule means that it has a certain appearance. It's shining. It is well, actually, that's it. I don't think I can explain it any further. So this character rule means that it has an appearance of something. So while Schilling translates it in two different ways, first with how colorful and how shiny, then with sometimes decorated, sometimes blank, I'm not really sure. But by the way, in the Chinese original text, we can also see that the name of Hexagram 22 has to do with color, because this character, if you look at the left part, that has this component by, which means white, which we also see here with the white horse. And this character, po, or fan, if you like, that refers to some sort of white that isn't pure white. It's more or less grayish, or maybe more almost the color of it has a touch of, what's it called? Well, more or less sand kind of color to it. It's not really pure white. So the text from Hexagram 22 also shows that it has to do with color. And we can also see that here with the sixth line. Again, white is being mentioned. So, yeah, well, that's about Schilling's translation. If you are able to work with the German language, and if you're able to translate it, if you want, if you need that, there are plenty of websites these days. DeepL translates German very well, and even ChatGPT and Bing Chat, they also translate these texts very well. So, anyway. Another translation that you will often see for the name of Hexagram 22 is grace. And I believe that Wilhelm was one of the first to translate it as grace in the German original, the Anmut. And I'm personally not sure if that is the best translation for the name of Hexagram 22. I mean, the German original, Anmut, that's okay, because that word doesn't really have other meanings other than that of some sort of decoration looking beautiful and having a nice appearance. But the English word grace has several other meanings that really don't have much to do with what Hexagram 22 is all about. And this is how you often get all these different interpretations and translations that focus on that only use the translation and don't look at the Chinese original, because this whole word grace, it can put you completely on the wrong track on what Hexagram 22 is actually about. So in Wilhelm's translation, and in the English version, he translates it constantly as grace. And he explains in a footnote that this hexagram shows tranquil beauty, clarity within, quiet without. That's his description of the hexagram image. It's clarity, that's trigram fire below, within, and quiet, that is trigram mountain on top of that. That's the outside. So quiet without. This is the tranquility of pure contemplation. And that's actually, I think, a reference to hexagram 20, hexagram 20, which is called contemplation. When desire is silenced and the will comes to rest, the world as idea becomes manifest. In this aspect, the world is beautiful and removed from the struggle for existence. This is the world of art. However, contemplation alone will not put the will to rest absolutely. It will awaken again, and then all the beauty of form will appear to have been only a brief moment of exaltation. Hence, this is still not the true way of redemption. For this reason, Confucius felt very uncomfortable when once, on consulting the oracle, he obtained the hexagram of grace. So, as you can see here, Wilhelm is referencing this anecdote that this video is about, this story from Confucius consulting the Yijing. But, Wilhelm, please, why talk of redemption and say that this is the reason that Confucius felt very uncomfortable? Because as we have seen in the way this story is being told in the different examples, the different several versions of this text, it doesn't have anything to do with redemption. And I think this shows Wilhelm's Christian background, because Christianity, I believe, is all about redemption. But Confucius never talked about redemption in this story, and he mainly said that things should have definite position and that things should be clear and not mixed. Colors shouldn't be mixed. Clear colors should be separated, and so everybody should know what he can expect, and it shouldn't be just a jumble of anything. Positions should be clear. It doesn't have anything to do with redemption. So I totally disagree with Wilhelm here, because redemption, it's definitely not the right not the right explanation for Confucius' unhappiness here. So the Anmut, I looked it up in this online dictionary. It refers to grace and charm, and it gives here as an example of the text. Oops, here I mean this what here Anmut einer Person. It's the natural captivating charm, natürliche bestrickende Anmut. Anmut haben, to be charming, and jemandem Anmut verleihen, to add or lend charm to something. So a better translation would, for the English version of Wilhelm, might probably have been charm or charming, but grace, to me, it doesn't really capture the idea of what Hexagram 22 is all about, and especially not that it doesn't show why Confucius felt uncomfortable with it. Oh, it's the last sheet. So, but anyway, I don't have more pages in my presentation. So what I actually wanted to show you here is how looking at the Chinese original version of a story or of the Zhao Yi can give you interesting information about how a story was perceived, and how a story, in this case, was also expanded on, and how more meaning was added to it. But I think it also shows how Hexagram 22 was interpreted by the authors of these examples. So that shows that how we translate it is not always how they looked at the hexagram in ancient China. So hexagram 22, as far as I'm concerned, knowing all this, doesn't really have much to do with this idea of grace or beauty. I think it refers to something that is colorful, but that's not necessarily a good thing or a bad thing. It's definitely about decoration, and it's definitely about packaging, but it could also have to do with propriety and decorum. So maybe it has to do with wearing a business suit to your job, because everybody is wearing a business suit. So you're confirming to that which fits the situation, what is needed in the situation. So it's also about ritual, which also explains why Stephen Field and Richard Koons linked this hexagram and the text to a Chinese wedding, which is also about ritual. So anyway, I hope you liked this example, which wasn't really an example that I had planned to add to the videos, but I thought since it is a relatively famous example and it is mentioned by Wilhelm and in other sources, I thought, well, let's do it anyway. So thank you for watching. And did I already press this button? I did. Thank you and see you in the next video. Bye.